Hey, what's up guys, it's Textman talking to you here, and today I want to compare the most talked about computer in the last week, the M2 MacBook Pro, against the base model 14-inch MacBook Pro. In the last M2 MacBook Pro video, I explained why you shouldn't buy this computer. Previously on TechSumer. Do not buy the M2 MacBook Pro. But in today's video, I want to go even more in-depth comparison between these two computers. Why should you not buy the cheaper and similarly newer M2 MacBook Pro and simply spend a little bit more and go for the M1 Pro MacBook Pro 14-inch. In today's video, it's more like why should you spend more money, and probably in some video in the future I will do, when I get at least my M2 MacBook Air, I will do why should you save money on this purchase decision. So an M2 MacBook Pro against an M2 MacBook Air. But in today's video I will focus on the comparison between the cheapest and most expensive baseline models on the MacBook Pro lineup. So before we get started, do not forget to leave a like, subscribe to my channel. That would really help me out. So don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. So no further ado, let's get started. So let's start with the comparison by the designs. The M2 MacBook Pro comes with the old MacBook design. This MacBook Pro design was introduced in 2016 and it's old. It's very old. So, I mean, if you do really like this design, you are using a 6 to 7 year old design that Apple implemented in 2016. So, yes, it's a very old design. It's proven, but it has some trouble over cooling some machines and some Intel chips. But now, with the M2 chip and even with the M1, these machines proved to be very cool designs. Like the design here proved to be very portable, very easy to use, very light, very thin, and of course proved to be capable to cool the M1 chip last year. And this year it's having a little bit more trouble cooling the M2, but it's fine. The cooling system is still good. It has only one fan, but that's the decision that Apple made it so it could be cheaper. Okay, the M2 chip comes with very different options. It comes with a bin version, a non-bin version. It comes with 8, 16 or even 24 gigabytes of RAM. It also comes with 256, 512, 1 terabyte and 2 terabyte storage options, and those are pretty expensive. But if you are considering buying the MacBook Pro, maybe you should look for the base model. The base model MacBook Pro comes with the same design as the old M1 MacBook Pro. This design is proven and of course is used in so many MacBooks out there. So why is it a bad design, in my opinion? Well, because it completely carves in your hand too much. Then, of course, when compared to the new 14-inch MacBook Pro design, it's way sharper on the edges than the newer MacBook Pro's design. As you can see here, I have my 16-inch MacBook Pro, which features the new MacBook Pro design. This design is rounder and easier to hold on your hands. As you can see here, it's rounder, easier to hold and more comfortable. Although it makes the computer a little bit more bulkier, but that's a trade-off that you have to pay. Of course, this design would be still good if it had a little bit more thickness so you could fit a bigger battery, because this M2 MacBook Pro is still the most efficient and most battery powerful computer on the Apple lineup. But if it had a little bit more battery with the new MacBook Pro 14-inch design, it would be insane with probably a 24-hour battery life, and it will perform even better when under loads from the M2 chip. And other than that, I think that the only problems with this older design is the fact that it has less ports than the current MacBook Pro 14-inch. So if you think like, oh, maybe I don't really care about design, I don't really care about it, then you have to consider that with this design trend, you are giving up ports and you are giving up a good webcam. So in terms of design, I do think that this 14-inch MacBook Pro with the M1 Pro chip is a way better design and way better computer in terms of ports, webcam, hardware in general from the M2 MacBook Pro. But not everything is about design, not everything is about the good hardware that is implemented. Also, there's a lot of talk about the displays, and so if you compare these two displays, you're going to see that there's a huge difference between these two displays. I will represent the M1 Pro MacBook Pro 14-inch with my M1 Max 16-inch, which is simply the same display with a bigger size display. You can see that this display is awesome, it's incredible. This is the 16-inch version, so the 14-inch version is a little bit smaller, but by only paying $2,000 for the base model M1 Pro MacBook Pro, you are getting this same exact screen that you are seeing here. So yes, this is a very good screen. The colors are almost 100% accurate. It's a mini LED display with ProMotion capabilities. It also has true black technology from the mini LEDs. It's an incredible display. I love this display to watch movies, to watch every single type of content that I watch on my computer. I love this computer. I love it so much. This display is so incredible. And yes, if you buy the M1 Pro MacBook Pro 14-inch, you will have the same display. But if you go for the M2 MacBook Pro, you only have the old P3 color gamut LCD liquid retina that Apple likes to call it right now from the older generation MacBook Pros. This display is good, do not get me wrong. I used this one for almost like 5 years with my old Intel machine, but I mean, it's not the best. Right now you have amazing OLED displays on the Windows competition. You have an amazing mini LED display, and it starts to add up these things. Like, you start to add up the ports, the webcam, the display, and you will see that yes, maybe the money starts to make sense, even if you don't really care about the design. So yes, the display difference between these two computers is just ridiculous. You can take a look here and see even the bezels on the 14-inch are way smaller. Like, here I have the 16-inch MacBook Pro against the current M2 MacBook Pro, and you can see that the display thickness on the bezels is just so stupid. Like, on the other hand, you have a huge display with a 16-inch, and the other hand, you have the 13-inch design. Don't really pay attention to that. Just simply pay attention for the bezels. Just ridiculous on the 16-inch version, where I compared to the other M2 MacBook Pro. Of course, the M1 Pro 14-inch version just comes with the same display, like I was telling you, in the same bezel treatment. So it's an incredible display. And I mean, I don't really care about the notch. I've talked about it so many times on my channel. So if you want to know my opinion, short and powerfully, I don't really care. It's a good addition to the MacBook Pro because most of the time Apple will hide the notch with the menu bar, and when it's not being hidden, I mean, you will not probably forget about it in 10 minutes. So I don't really care about the notch. Other than that, these displays are insane, and of course, they house an amazing 1080p webcam. Take a look. Hey guys, this is Tech Sumer here, and this is vlogger style on the M1 Max MacBook Pro. This is my camera test, and what do you think? This is also the microphone test. Let me know in the comments below how I look. I think I look pretty great. Looking at my and testing out, I think that's pretty good. This is a 1080p camera, but it looks pretty great, and for Zoom calls, it looks perfect. In my opinion, a little bit more crisp than the center stage camera on the studio display. But let me know in the comments below how it looks and how it sounds, the microphones. As you saw, that was an incredible webcam experience, way better than the older M2 MacBook Pro's webcam. Believe me, that webcam sucked. I don't have a comparison about that because, I mean, it's just bad. It's just horrible. So trust me, that's really bad. Then we have the speakers, which are another hardware problem that is very audible when hearing between the difference of the M1 Pro MacBook Pro and, of course, the M2 MacBook Pro. The difference is just insane. Take a listen. And as you heard, the difference is so stupid. Like, the M1 Pro speakers are much fuller, much more powerful, while the M2 MacBook Pro speakers are teeny and very low volume when compared to the other M1 Pro speakers. So yes, the 14-inch until now seems to be an amazing deal. Like, you get an amazing speaker system, you get a mini LED display, you get an amazing hardware, ports, you get an amazing hardware, ports, you get a better webcam, you get, like I was telling you, better speakers, you get a better design, better display. There's no less things than advantages from choosing the M1 Pro MacBook Pro. And the difference starts to be like from the base model M2 MacBook Pro and the base model M1 Pro MacBook Pro. The difference is about $700. It's a big difference, but I think that you get enough. And if you price spec these two computers, like, you get the same gigabyte on the M2 MacBook Pro as you will get on the M1 Pro, because the M1 Pro base model comes with 16 gigabytes of RAM and, of course, 512 gigabytes of storage. If you spec'd out your M2 MacBook Pro with the same configuration, you will see that the price difference is like around $300. So it starts to make very much sense to spend the extra $200 to go for a computer with a better webcam, a better speaker system, a better display, way better display, a better performance, of course, with the M1 Pro chip, still being way more powerful than the M2, and of course, having more ports, a better design, and in my opinion, a better keyboard and trackpad experience, just because they are all more comfortable. And with this black row of keys that you have on the MacBook Pro 14-inch, I mean, it's just insanely cool to watch. So I think that all of these stuff are just pros, and about for $300, I think it makes much more sense to go for the M1 Pro MacBook Pro 14-inch. And we have not even talked about the performance difference between these two computers. The M1 Pro MacBook Pro 14-inch is still way better than the M2 MacBook Pro. Although the M2 MacBook Pro still has the M2 chip, which is the new generation of the M1 featured on the M1 Pro MacBook Pro 14-inch, is still worse than the M1 Pro chip, because the M1 Pro chip is still a Pro chip and it will have a more powerful, more GPU cores, more powerful CPU cores, and so it still has more cores, more power, and in multi-core performance it still beats out the M2 MacBook Pro, while the M2 MacBook Pro edges out the M1 Pro chip on the M1 Pro MacBook Pro 14-inch on the single-core performance. All of these tested on Geekbench. But if you go for the Cinebench R23 test, you will see that the M1 Pro MacBook Pro 14-inch still beats out by a ton the M2 chip. And even in real-world performance, you will see that the difference on CPU power is just ridiculous still, because the jump from the M1 to the M2 was only about 18%, while the difference between the M1 and the M1 Pro was way bigger than that. Way bigger, believe me. Then, if you go to the GPU side, where the M2 got the most amount of improvements, about 35% of improvements, you will see that it's still lacking behind the M1 Pro, because the M1 Pro still features more cores. So, I mean, the difference is so big that it's not even worth talking about. And of course, in my opinion, it's not the main thing, because the $300 is not about the performance, it's about the everything else that you get. The display, the keyboard, the mouse or the trackpad, the design, more ports, MagSafe, HDMI, SD card slot, 1080p webcam, better speakers, better battery life, or even out battery life. I mean, there's so much advantages to go for the M1 Pro MacBook Pro 14-inch, and for only $300, I totally advise you to go for it. So even in charging, which is something that you probably will not take very notice of on your MacBook Pro, the M1 Pro MacBook Pro 14-inch is able to fast charge at 97 watts, while the M2 MacBook Pro is limited to no fast charging. It doesn't have any sort of fast charger, so it doesn't really matter. So if you do really value bang for your buck, then you should go for the M1 Pro MacBook Pro 14-inch. But if you only value performance, then you should go for the M1 Pro 14-inch. And if you only value a good computer, you should go for the M1 Pro 14-inch. There's no instance where I will recommend you going for the M2 MacBook Pro. Even if you go for the base model, it's still a terrible deal. In that case, you should go for the M2 MacBook Air, which I will have on my channel in the next few weeks. I will buy one, review one, and show you every single detail about this computer. So if you are excited for that, do not forget to subscribe to my channel so you can keep up with all my videos. And while you're there, do not forget to leave a like and turn on the notification bell so you can keep up with all my videos. Leave a comment, leave a like. That's all that I want to ask for you guys. So no further ado, this has been Tech Smart talking to you here. Bye.